The most ancient, the most profound, and the most universal of symbols is the human body. Among Greeks, Persians, Egyptians, and Hindus, a philosophical study of the threefold nature of man was seen as essential to both ethical and religious teaching. In the mysteries of different nations, it was taught that the laws, elements, and powers of the universe were reflected in the human constitution, and that all which existed outside of man found its parallel within him. The universe, immeasurable in vastness and unfathomable in depth, lay beyond mortal grasp. Even the divine beings themselves could perceive only a fragment of the inaccessible radiance from which they arose. At rare moments, when filled with divine inspiration, man could rise above the limits of his personality and catch a fleeting vision of that celestial brilliance that pervades creation. Yet, even in his highest moments of illumination, he remained unable to impress upon the substance of his rational soul a flawless image of the manifold activity of the heavens. Aware of the futility of trying to comprehend intellectually that which surpassed the capacity of reason, the early philosophers turned their focus from the incomprehensible divinity to man himself. Within the narrow scope of his nature, they discovered the reflection of all mysteries belonging to the outer spheres. From this arose a hidden theological system in which God was conceived as the great man, and, in turn, man as the little God. Extending the analogy further, the universe was seen as a man, and man as a smaller universe. The vast whole was called the Macrocosm, the great world or body, and the divine essence directing its functions was named the Macroprosophus. The human form, as the lesser universe, was termed the Microcosm, and the divine principle within it was called the Microprosophus. The central concern of the pagan mysteries was to reveal to the initiate the true relation between the macrocosm and the microcosm, that is, between God and man. The knowledge of the correspondences between the organs and powers of the microcosmic man and those of the macrocosmic man became the most treasured wisdom of the early schools. The ancient view of man is well expressed in the description that portrays him as a little world within the greater universe. Like an unborn child, he is suspended by his threefold spirit in the matrix of the macrocosm. His earthly body remains in constant harmony with its parent earth, while his astral soul is attuned to the living soul of the cosmos. He exists in it, and it exists in him, for the universal essence pervades all space and is space itself, boundless and infinite. His third spirit, the divine, is described as a tiny ray, one among the countless emanations flowing from the highest cause, the spiritual light of the world. In this trinity is expressed the unity of the spiritual and the physical, the organic and the inorganic, three in one. It was taught that the first principle is the eternal God, the second is eternity, and the third is the model of the universe, together forming the intelligible triad. Long before the rise of idolatry, the early priests placed within the sanctuaries of their temples the figure of a man. This human image symbolized the divine power in its countless manifestations. In this way, the priests of antiquity accepted man as their living textbook, and through the study of his form and nature they sought to understand the greater mysteries of the heavens, of which they were themselves a part. It is believed that this figure, standing above the early altars, may have been fashioned as a mannequin and, like the emblematic hands of certain mystery schools, was adorned with carved or painted hieroglyphs. It may have opened to reveal the relative positions of organs, bones, muscles, nerves, and other elements of the body. Through the accumulation of ages of study, this figure became covered in elaborate hieroglyphs and symbolic signs. Each part carried a hidden meaning. The proportions themselves provided a standard by which the vastness of the cosmos could be measured. It stood as a magnificent composite emblem, containing within it the knowledge preserved by the sages and hierophants. With time, however, came the age of idolatry. The mysteries decayed from within, their secrets lost, and none could recall the identity of the mysterious figure who had stood above the altar. What remained was the memory that this image had once represented the universal power, and so it came to be regarded as a god, the very one in whose likeness man had been formed. Forgetting the original purpose of the mannequin, the priests themselves fell into worship of the effigy, until their lack of spiritual understanding brought their temples to ruin, and the sacred statue crumbled along with the civilization that had forgotten its meaning. From the early teaching that man was fashioned in the image of God, the initiated minds of ancient ages built their great system of theology upon the foundation of the human body. Few realize today that the science of the human form was the source from which religious doctrines and laws first sprang. Many of the codes believed to be revelations from divinity were in truth the results of long and patient inquiry into the wonders of the human constitution and the infinite mysteries it revealed. In nearly all sacred writings of the world, an anatomical analogy can be discerned, most clearly in their creation myths. Those who know the study of birth and formation can easily recognize the roots of the allegory of Adam and Eve in the garden, the stages of the mysteries, and the ancient tales of divine incarnations. The story of the universal egg, the northern myth of the dark gap from which the seed of the world emerged, and the fish as a symbol of creative power, all reveal the true origin of theology. The philosophers of old understood that man himself was the key to life's riddle, for he was the living image of the divine plan. In ages to come, humanity too will recognize the weight of the ancient truth that the true study of mankind is man himself. Both God and man share a dual constitution, the higher part unseen and the lower visible. Between these lies an intermediary realm, the place where the hidden and the revealed meet. Just as the spiritual essence of God governs his vast form, the universe, which is but a crystallized thought, so too does the spiritual essence of man govern the visible body that is his outward self. Thus, the relation of man's spirit to his body mirrors the relation of God to the cosmos. The mysteries taught that spirit, or life, precedes form, and that what comes before contains within it all that follows. Since spirit is prior to form, form is contained within spirit. It is often said that man's spirit is within his body, yet philosophy and theology regard this belief as mistaken. Spirit first defines the space in which form may arise, and then manifests within it. In truth, form exists within spirit, though spirit is greater than form. As man's body is contained within his spirit, so the universe itself, with all the stars and worlds, is contained within the boundless essence of God, the universal spirit. The sacred tetragrammaton, the four-lettered name of God, was arranged as a tetractys within the form of an inverted human heart. Beneath it, the name Jehovah was transformed into Jehoshua by the addition of the radiant Hebrew letter Shin. The entire image symbolized the throne of God and his hierarchies within the heart of man. The symbol conveyed the teaching that within every human being rests the priceless name of God, not written in ink but revealed in the living flame of divine love. Each soul bears this hidden book within, and in it lie all treasures of wisdom, for it is none other than the Christ within man. According to the ancient understanding, every form, whether spiritual or material, possesses three central points. These were described as the upper, the middle, and the lower centers. Yet the attempt to represent abstract realities in diagrams often creates ambiguities, for one aspect may contradict another. While that which is above is usually considered higher in power and dignity, in truth the center itself is superior and precedes both the so-called above and below. What appears as the highest is in reality the central point, and both the others, though said to be above or beneath, are actually subordinate. This becomes clearer if one understands above as closeness to the source and below as distance from it. The source itself is fixed in the center, while all relative distances lie along the radii stretching outward toward the circumference. Thus in philosophy and theology, up means moving inward toward the spirit, while down means moving outward toward matter. The center is spirit, the circumference is matter. Upward movement is an ascent toward spirit, while downward movement is an intensification of materiality. This principle may be compared to the cone, whose apex, seen from above, is the central point within the circle of its base. These three universal centers, the superior, the inferior, and the link binding them, were likened to three suns or three aspects of one sun, radiant centers of light. They also correspond to the three principal centers of the human body, itself a reflection of the greater universe. The first is analogous to the light existing within its source, the second to the light proceeding from that source, and the third to the radiance communicated outward to other forms of life. Because the superior or spiritual center lies in the midst of the other two, its physical analogue is the heart, the most mysterious and sacred organ of the body. The second, which links the higher and the lower, finds its counterpart in the brain, exalted as the seat of intellect. The third, considered the lowest in spiritual rank but the most important in physical function, is the generative system. In this symbolism, the heart is the fountain of life, the brain is the bridge uniting life and form through reason, and the generative power is the source by which physical organisms come into being. The aspirations of each person are shaped by which of these three centers governs most strongly. In the materialist, the lower predominates. In the intellectual, the higher rules. But in the initiate, the heart, by flooding both extremes with spiritual light, harmonizes mind and body alike. As light bears witness to life, so the mind bears witness to spirit, and the activity of the lower nature bears witness to intelligence. The mind testifies of the heart, while the generative system testifies of the mind. Hence the spiritual essence is symbolized by the heart, the intellectual power by the opened eye, the pineal or cyclopean eye, also known as the double-faced Janus of the mysteries, and the generative system by symbols such as the flower, the staff, the cup, or the hand. All of the mysteries acknowledged the heart as the center of spiritual consciousness, yet they often concealed this teaching by presenting the heart outwardly as the symbol of the emotional nature. In this scheme, the generative center was regarded as the physical body, the heart as the emotional body, and the brain as the mental body. The brain was set forth as the superior sphere, but when the initiate advanced through the lower stages, he was instructed that the brain served only as the substitute for the spiritual flame hidden in the secret depths of the heart. The student of esoteric learning eventually discovers that the ancients employed deliberate veils to obscure the true meaning of their mysteries, and the substitution of the brain for the heart was one such veil. The three stages of the ancient rites were, with rare exception, conferred within chambers arranged to correspond to the three great centers of the human and cosmic bodies. When possible, the temple itself was built in the likeness of the human form. The candidate entered at the point corresponding to the feet and received the highest initiation in the chamber that corresponded to the brain. The first stage, called the material mystery, was linked to the generative system and raised the candidate through the different levels of concrete thought. The second stage was conferred in the chamber aligned with the heart, but it represented the middle faculty, the mental power, through which the initiate was led into the mysteries of abstract thought and lifted as high as the mind could reach. The third stage took place in the highest chamber, which outwardly corresponded to the brain, yet secretly represented the heart. Here was given the true mystery of the heart, and in this sacred place the initiate for the first time understood the meaning of the eternal words, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." It was also taught that the brain contains 7 hearts, and the heart contains 7 brains, though such truths belong to a higher science not to be fully revealed. The initiates further explained that all images created for the mysteries were not realities in themselves, but representations of hidden truths. These images of the gods were not meant for worship, but as signs and reminders of invisible powers and principles. In the same way, the body of man must not be mistaken for the true self, but must be seen as the dwelling of the self, just as the temple was the house of God. When the body is ruled by ignorance and corruption, it becomes the prison or tomb of the divine principle, but when unfolded and regenerated, it is the house of the deity, the sanctuary of the creative power that gave it form. Man, in his essence, is an immortal and unchanging principle, while his bodies alone pass through the cycles of birth and death. The immortal is the reality, the mortal is the shadow. In each earthly life, the eternal reality inhabits the temporary unreality, freed for a time through death and liberated forever through illumination. Upon the 12 phalanges of the fingers appear the figures of the apostles, each marked by its own distinctive symbol. Those who endured martyrdom are shown with the instrument of their death. Andrew bears a cross, Thomas carries a javelin or a builder's square. James the Less is represented with a club, Philip with a cross, Bartholomew with a knife or scimitar, Matthew with a sword or spear, and sometimes a purse, Simon with a club or a saw, Matthias with an axe, and Judas with a halberd. The apostles whose emblems are not linked to martyrdom are Peter, who carries 2 crossed keys, one of gold and one of silver, James the Great, who holds a pilgrim's staff and a shell, and John, who is shown with a cup from which poison departed in the form of a serpent. The figure of Christ is placed upon the second phalange of the thumb, though in earlier systems of symbolism the second phalange was assigned to God the Father, the first to God the Son, and the base of the thumb to God the Holy Spirit. In another arrangement, the Virgin was placed at the base of the thumb, this part being consecrated to the moon. The ancient religions, often called polytheistic, did not truly worship many gods, but rather personified the attributes of the one God. By dividing the qualities of the divine into many forms, they created a pantheon, each deity representing one aspect of what the single God revealed in totality. These pantheons were therefore catalogues of divine attributes, corresponding in meaning to the hierarchies described in Hebrew mysticism. Every god and goddess of antiquity could be found reflected in the human body, as could the elements, planets, and constellations. 4 centers of the body were assigned to the elements, the 7 vital organs to the planets, the 12 main parts and members to the zodiac, the invisible nature of man to higher deities, while the hidden God was said to manifest through the marrow of the bones. It is difficult for many to comprehend that they themselves are universes, their bodies serving as a visible world through which countless currents of evolving life unfold. Within man, not only the kingdoms of mineral, plant, and animal life progress, but also hidden classifications of spiritual existence not yet known. As cells are the smallest units of man's body, so man himself is a small unit within the vast body of the universe. A theology founded upon the recognition of these correspondences is both just and true. Man's body has 5 distinct extremities, 2 legs, 2 arms, and a head. Because the head governs the 4 limbs, the number 5 became the symbol of man. The pyramid illustrates this truth, its 4 corners representing the arms and legs, and its apex the head, showing that one rational power rules over 4 irrational parts. The hands and feet represent the 4 elements, with the feet corresponding to earth and water, and the hands to fire and air. The brain is the sacred 5th element, ether, which unites and governs the other 4. When the feet are placed together and the arms outstretched, man becomes the living symbol of the cross, with the intellect as the uppermost point. The fingers and toes also hold deep meaning. The toes represent the 10 laws of the physical nature, while the fingers signify the 10 laws of the spiritual nature. The 4 fingers of each hand represent the 4 elements, and their 3 phalanges represent the divisions of each element, making 12 parts on each hand, corresponding to the 12 signs of the zodiac. The thumb, with its 2 phalanges and base, represents the threefold deity, the first phalange the creative aspect, the second the preservative aspect, and the base the generative or destructive aspect. When the hands are joined together, they become the 24 elders and the 6 days of creation. In symbolic thought, the human body is divided into 2 vertical halves, the right side being associated with light and the left side with darkness. Those unfamiliar with the deeper meanings of light and darkness have called the right side spiritual and the left side material. Light is the emblem of objectivity, while darkness is the emblem of subjectivity. Since light is a manifestation of life, it comes after life. What comes before light is darkness, within which light appears only for a time, while darkness itself remains eternal. Because life is older than light, its only true emblem is darkness, which is regarded as the veil forever hiding the essence of abstract and undifferentiated being. In earlier times men fought with the right arm and used the left arm to shield the vital parts of the body. Thus the right side was considered offensive and the left side defensive. For this reason the right was regarded as masculine and the left as feminine. Some hold that the common habit of right-handedness arose from the practice of keeping the left hand bound to defense. Moreover, Just as the source of existence is in the primal darkness before light, so the spiritual part of man is in the darker side of his being, for the heart is set on the left. Among the mistaken ideas born of associating darkness with evil was the belief, held by several nations, that the right hand must be used for every constructive act, while the left hand was reserved for what was thought unclean or unworthy of the gods. From this arose the expression of the left-hand path for black magic, and the teaching that heaven lay on the right while hell was placed on the left. Some philosophers also taught that there were two forms of writing, one moving from left to right, the outer method, and one moving from right to left, the inner method. The outer writing was that which flowed away from the heart, while the inner writing, like that of the ancient Hebrews, was drawn toward the heart. The hidden doctrine holds that each part and member of the body is mirrored in the brain, and all that is in the brain is in turn mirrored in the heart. In symbolism, the head often represents intelligence and self-knowledge. Since the human body as a whole is the most perfect creation of the earth's evolution, it came to stand for divinity itself, the highest condition that can be known. Artists seeking to picture the divine often show only a hand reaching from an impenetrable cloud. The cloud signifies the unknowable, hidden from man by the limits of human nature, while the hand represents the divine action, the only aspect of God that can be grasped by the senses below. The face contains a natural trinity. The eyes signify the spiritual power of comprehension, the nostrils signify the preserving and life-giving power, the mouth and ears signify the material power that shapes the lower world. The first sphere exists eternally and is creative. The second belongs to the mystery of the creative breach, the third to the creative word. By the word the material universe was formed, and the seven creative powers, the vowel sounds that came forth with the word, became the seven deities through whose service the lower world was ordered. At times the divine is symbolized by an eye, an ear, a nose, or a mouth. The eye signifies divine awareness, the ear divine attention, the nose divine vitality, and the mouth divine command. Johann Georg Gichtel, a profound philosopher and mystic, known as the most illumined of Jacob Boehm's disciples, quietly shared his symbolic diagrams among a small circle of devoted companions. He republished the works of Boehm, enriching them with remarkable figures, which he explained as representing the anatomy of the divine or inner man. These diagrams illustrated the states of humanity in its earthly, fallen, and regenerated conditions. Gichtel himself gave little written explanation of his figures, and the inscriptions upon them remain the main key to their interpretation. The two end figures, known as the third table, depict the two sides of the same diagram and are meant to show the condition of the whole man in spirit, soul, and body when renewed. The second table presents the state of man in his lapsed and corrupted condition, without regard to regeneration. The first table, though not directly aligned with Gichtel's version, is presumed to represent the state of man before the fall, while Gichtel's emphasis was upon the regenerated nature. These three symbolic states reveal man before his fall in purity and glory, after his fall in corruption, and finally rising again through regeneration and sanctification toward perfection. Within the symbols can also be recognized the ancient centers of spiritual force, which reveal through their aspects the state of man's divine nature within. The ancients held that spirituality was not the cause of righteousness or reason, but rather the result of them. They taught that illumination could be reached only when the lower nature was purified and raised to a proper standard. The mysteries existed for this very purpose, to unfold man's nature according to fixed laws, by which he might come to know his constitution and the true aim of existence. This knowledge, which described how man's being could be regenerated and elevated to illumination, was the hidden doctrine of antiquity. What appeared as physical centers were in fact veils of spiritual organs, the unfolding of which could not be revealed to the unworthy. For this reason long periods of testing were required, to ensure that sacred power would remain in the hands of those fit to wield it. To preserve such knowledge from extinction, it was clothed in allegories and myths, meaningless to the profane but clear to the initiated. Even sacred writings follow this pattern, for beneath their narratives lies the hidden teaching of human regeneration. The characters long regarded as historical are in truth personifications of inner processes that unfold when man seeks consciously to free himself from ignorance and mortality. The garments and ornaments attributed to the gods also served as symbols, since in the mysteries clothing was the equivalent of form. The condition of the inner man was reflected in the quality and splendor of these robes. The physical body itself was seen as the garment of the spirit, and the more radiant the inner powers, the more glorious the apparel. Clothing was first worn for ornament rather than protection, and the mysteries taught that man's only true adornments were his virtues and achievements. Purity was signified by the white robe, sacrifice and love by the red robe, and altruism and integrity by the blue robe. Since the body was the robe of the spirit, deformities of mind or character were portrayed as deformities of form. Considering the human body as the measuring rule of the universe, philosophers declared that all things resemble in constitution, if not always in form, the body of man. The ancient thinkers regarded the earth itself as a living being, with its central point described as its navel, for the planet was conceived as a vast human form shaped into a sphere. Unlike the later belief that the earth is inanimate, the ancients considered the earth, as well as the stars and planets, to be individual beings endowed with intelligence. Even the kingdoms of nature were thought of as single entities. The animal kingdom, for example, was regarded as one great being, a mosaic of all the creatures within it, embodying every animal tendency, just as the entire human race exists within the constitution of the archetypal man. In the same way, races, nations, tribes, states, communities, and religions were viewed as collective beings composed of countless smaller units. Each community was seen to have an individuality arising from the sum of its members. Each religion was an individual whose body was the hierarchy and worshippers that sustained it. The organization of a religion represented its physical structure, while its members were the living cells forming that body. Thus, religions, nations, and societies, like men themselves, passed through the stages of life, for the life of man was taken as the standard by which all things were measured. According to the secret doctrine, man, through the gradual refinement of his nature and the sharpening of his inner faculties, is slowly rising above the limitations of matter and freeing himself from his mortal shell. When humanity has fulfilled its physical course, the form it leaves behind will serve other lives as a foundation for their progress. The path of man's evolution is ever toward his essential selfhood, and at the deepest descent into matter, he is furthest removed from his true being. The mysteries taught that not all of the spirit descends into the material sphere. The spirit is shown as a perfect triangle, with one point turned downward. That point, which is one part of the triad but of lesser dignity than the other two, descends for a time into material existence. The portion that remains unmanifest is the higher self, the eternal being, sometimes called the guardian or the oversoul, within which every human life is contained and made one with all others. At birth, only a part of the divine nature steps aside from immortality to take upon itself the dream of earthly existence, animating a body composed of the elements of the material world. At death, this part awakens from its dream and reunites with its eternal condition. This continual descent and return of spirit is known as the wheel of life and death, explained by the philosophers under the teaching of the soul's rebirth. Yet by initiation into the mysteries, through processes of sacred discipline, this cycle could be transcended. It was taught that within earthly life itself, the spirit asleep in form could be awakened and consciously reunited with its divine source, without awaiting the dissolution of the body. This was both the purpose and the supreme goal of the mysteries, that man should come to know, in full awareness, his union with the divine origin of his being. In symbolic diagrams, the front view of man illustrated his divine principles in their perfected state, while the back view depicted his inferior, or nocturnal, condition. From the sphere of the astral mind a line ascends through the sphere of reason into that of the senses. The stars filling the spheres of mind and senses signify their shadowy and night-like nature. Within reason, the higher and lower are brought into balance, reason in mortal man corresponding to illumined understanding in the spiritual man. From the mirror of the deity, a tree rises, its roots in the heart, its trunk passing through the sphere of understanding, and its branches spreading into the sphere of the senses. The roots and trunk represent the divine essence of man, his true spirituality. The branches are his individuality, the separate expression of that essence, and the leaves, fleeting and impermanent, correspond to the personality, which shares none of the enduring nature of its divine source.